Welcome to the Republican Professor Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lucas J. Mather. Today, we're going to take a look at Paul Kengor's review of Megan Basham's book in the Claremont Review of Books, summer 2024, pages 82, 83. It's called Fleecing the Flock. Paul Kengor, if you don't know, is professor of political science at Grove City College, director of the college's Institute for Faith and Freedom, best-selling author of over 20 books, and editor of The American Spectator. I want to put a plug in for Claremont Review of Books and thank them for the excellent job they do. Every time they put it out, it's never disappointing. It comes in your mailbox. It's not that expensive. And it comes 4 times a year. It's got great artwork, and it's reminiscent of kind of an old school newspaper kind of a feel, except the entire thing is about books. It's about what people are saying in books, academic books, typically cultural and political issues related to public policy, government, constitutional law, sometimes theology, religion, philosophy. Take, for example, NYU Press. And so here's NYU Press. They have a little blurb in there. University of Chicago Press. Different university presses. There's an ad for Claremont, for Hillsdale College. And if you don't have time or money to get a bunch of books and read them, it's a really good way to get commentary on what people are talking about in books. These are book reviews, and you get a very good flavor of the academic culture on at least certain topics. I highly recommend Claremont Review of Books. I highly recommend you support them. Go to I don't know their website. Sorry. You can Google it and you'll find it. And let me know if you check it out and you enjoy it. Maybe comment on this. Megan Basham's Shepherds for Sales, an engaging, revealing, often depressing expose of evangelical ministers who have sold out themselves and their flocks to the agendas of the secular left. Wow, tell me how you really feel, Paul. That's how he starts. Here's Paul again. What makes Basham's tale so sad? And this is her book, Shepherds for Sale, How Evangelical Leaders Traded the Truth for a Leftist Agenda by Megan Basham, Broadside Books, 352 pages, $32.99. Kind of steep on the price there, Megan. Here's Paul Kengor again. What makes Basham's tale so sad is that many of the ministers she covers began as conservatives, or at least not as left-wingers. But in due course, they capitulated to the progressive left, especially on issues like race, sex, and gender. These morally and intellectually compromised pastors have ladled up the whole alphabet soup from CRT, critical race theory, and DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, to LGBTQIA2S+, the latest embellishment in an ever more ornate sexual panoply. Basham is a reporter, most notably for the Daily Wire. Her main beat is the evangelical movement, a subject she has covered at the Wall Street Journal, First Things, National Review, World Magazine, and The American Spectator, among many other venues. She does real and often courageous digging to come up with firsthand sources. The chapters of this book typically open with anecdotes from her own reporting on topics ranging from climate change to illegal immigration, abortion to COVID, CRT to quote, to hashtag #MeToo, and LGBTQ movement. In each area, she highlights examples of actual people she has met who have been severely hurt by their wayward pastors. Wow. In so many cases, what these struggling Christians need in a minister is a man who can look them in the eye with compassion and tell them firmly what Jesus told the woman taken in adultery: go and sin no more. Many of these clergies, however, seem reluctant to utter those words of true mercy. They lack the moral courage to call sin, sin, in the face of a pervasive left wing narrative that encourages or even praises what Scripture calls evil. All right, that's the first part of the book review. This book is getting a lot of attention. Partial disclosure, I have not read it. I would say full disclosure, but then I don't want to say full disclosure and then only give partial disclosure, because I'm not going to fully disclose anything. I don't even know what it would mean to fully disclose. There's so many facts in the world. I can't disclose them all. In so many cases, okay, so here's the next part. As Basham notes, these pastors have succumbed to forces alien to their churches and hostile to their Bibles. They have allowed ideas entirely unrelated to the Christian tradition to infect their congregations and metastasize there. Basham begins by citing some of my own books and articles on how the far left in the early 20th century, particularly the Marxist left, is there another kind? Carefully and deliberately set out to infiltrate churches. Marxist and socialist front organizations cynically invoked slogans like social justice and peace as cover for a hardline political takeover. This decades-long effort was monitored by the U.S. Congress, FBI, and other government bodies. It was spearheaded by devious operatives and Communist Party beneficiaries like the Methodist minister and early American Civil Liberties Union co-founder, Reverend Harry Ward. For most of the early to mid 1900s, the worst dupes of this enterprise were from mainline Protestant denominations, the United Methodist Church, the Episcopal Church, and the Presbyterian Church USA, ironically. Many of those churches lurched so far leftward that by the end of the century, they suffered a mass exodus of parishioners who switched to non-denominational, independent evangelical churches. Nowadays, those evangelical churches have become the new mission field for leftists seeking to redefine Christianity in their own image. That's where Basham herself, an evangelical, looks to cast some light. Satan's wolves in sheep's clothing secretly slip into the church for one reason, she warns: to prevent it from snatching more souls out of the fire. Unfortunately, many shepherds today have let themselves be carried away with the zeitgeist, tossed to and fro by every wind of doctrine. Some pastors have fully bought in to the left's new brand of cultural Marxism. Others appear simply gutless, men without chests, afraid to resist as the latest liberal lobby attacks them, their church, and their flock. Sometimes these activists go straight for tried and true forms of emotional manipulation, tarring dissenters as hateful bigots. At other times, they use subtler rhetorical tactics. Progressives are masters of sloganeering. I think that's a key insight into this book review. What is the difference between using language and manipulating people with language? having a grip on what language is and what it's for, how language relates to logic, how to correctly define terms accurately, avoiding informal fallacies related to language, how that relates to public policy and constitutional law is the fascination and obsession that I've had in my professional career. I started out as a linguist professionally. That gave me an opportunity to think deeply about what language is, how it works, what's communication and what's manipulation. Then, of course, I got a PhD in constitutional law, and a lot of that has to do with just the uses and abuses of language. So I have noticed the same thing that he's noticed, that progressives, the people on the left, are good manipulators with language, but that's not the whole story, though. The fuller story is that people allow themselves to be swayed and misled. I mean, his discussion there about devious operatives in the Communist Party, that's half the story. True, it's true, but the fact that people went along with it without being able to recognize it for what it was, that's the other half of the story. And that's really a failure of our educational system. It's a failure of Sunday schools. It's a failure of school. It's a failure of the culture too. So I would add that. Basham calls attention to a particularly noxious form of verbal manipulation that has gained currency in the last several years. The injunction to, quote, love thy neighbor, unquote, has been used in bad faith to back believers into partisan corners. She explains how any extremist policy can be given the force of Christian doctrine when disingenuously represented as a matter of love. Here's a block quote from Basham's book. Quote, why should the United States reward tens of millions of illegal immigrants with citizenship, despite the fact that they broke our laws and it drives down wages for blue-collar workers? Love your neighbor. Why should I take an experimental COVID-19 vaccine I don't want when I'm statistically extremely unlikely to experience anything more than mild symptoms? Love your neighbor, unquote. The examples go on. Why not affirm your niece's gender mutilation surgery? Don't you love your neighbor? Basham notes that after Roe versus Wade was overturned, California Governor Gavin Newsom put up billboards in Texas offering easy abortions next door in his state. Quote, California is ready to help. Love your neighbor as yourself, unquote. What a waste of money for California taxpayers. I mean, who paid for that? I hope I didn't pay for that with my tax money. What a waste of money. The effort to identify far left policy with Christian love was particularly relentless during COVID. Basham cites as Exhibit A the, quote, love your neighbor, get the shot movement, led by National Institutes of Health Director Francis Collins. For many evangelical leaders, this became a righteous crusade. For example, Russell Moore, who left the Southern Baptist Convention to become the editor of Christianity Today. Christianity Today's president CEO Timothy Dalrymple, best-selling author Philip Yancey, Phil Vischer, creator of the Christian animated series VeggieTales, columnist David French, and many others, when not pandering to those they selectively defined as neighbors, they were judging others who disagreed and shaming the great unwashed. They released a high and mighty statement loaded with scripture verses and dripping with sanctimony. In the name of faith in Jesus Christ, signatories pledged they would, quote, wear masks because, quote, mask rules are not experts taking away our freedom, but an opportunity to follow Jesus' command to love our neighbors as ourselves, unquote. They would, quote, get vaccinated, unquote, because, quote, vaccination is a provision from God, unquote. That's from the Bible. Just kidding. Yeah, I don't think I remember seeing that in the Bible. I do remember seeing the Good Samaritan helping the person that was hurt by other people. I do remember seeing that. I remember seeing that. But I don't remember anything about vaccination in that story. I remember Jesus healing people supernaturally. I do remember that. Is that just me? Is it me? Did I misread it? Here's Kengor. Continuing, we're almost done. And they would correct misinformation and conspiracy theories when we encounter them in our social media and communities, because Christians are called to love the truth. We should not be swayed by falsehoods. Oh, it's an interesting. I'm going to comment on that. I don't see these people standing up for people who've been censored for sharing the truth. They're notoriously quiet when their brothers and sisters are being unjustly and falsely censored, like we've been here on the podcast. YouTube took down our interview with Heidi St. John, saying it was extremely dangerous. They didn't say exactly why, but they implied that it wasn't the vast majority of the interview, which had to do with homeschooling and running for Congress. Although maybe they did think that was dangerous. Probably did, but they implied that it had something to do with what is in fact a therapeutic, but is labeled and mislabeled as a vaccination. And it was her story of her dad. And it was a tender story. You can hear it. It's on Apple Podcasts. Just go listen to it on Apple Podcasts. That has not been censored yet. But the video was taken down by YouTube. Apple Podcasts and YouTube, not the same company, apparently. But it was a story of Heidi's dad dying. He died. And they said it was misinformation. YouTube did when they took it down. The problem was it was true. That actually happened. And you can listen to the story yourself. It was a very small part of the interview, but it was at the beginning of the interview. Now, when you call something misinformation, that's not a sufficient condition for it being what you're calling it being misinformation. That's not how reality works. You see, it's a little bit more involved. The thing you're labeling misinformation actually has to be misinformation for it to truly be misinformation. And for these so-called truth warriors, I don't see any kind of attention span. And if there is an attention span, I don't see any character. I don't see them standing up for people who say true things and get censored. I don't see them standing up for that. And why would that be? I really want to know. You tell me. Why would that be? Why, first of all, why would it be that we're censored for saying the truth? Secondly, why would it be that these folks that say they're for the truth don't stand up for people that are wrongly censored? That's an interesting question. To me, that's evidence of an evil design. I'm not saying that they're evil, the people, although it does make me wonder what's going on in their souls. I think it's bad character, but I think it is an evil design. And I see in the Gospels, I see when Jesus comes on the scene, he's immediately opposed by dark spiritual forces, evil forces that are real. And if you don't believe in the demonic world, thanks for listening. We're glad you're here. But it's presented as reality in the Gospels. And I do wonder if that's what's going on here with censorship. I think it's evil. I think the only way that people, not only living now, but who come later and try to figure out what happened when they study this, have a heck of a time figuring out what to believe on what evidence if some of the evidence is being censored, hidden from view, as if it never existed in the first place. The example I gave from our podcast is just happened to be an example that you could look up yourself. You got Apple Podcasts. Look up Heidi St. John on the Republican Professor Podcasts. Do it now. And then you've got the YouTube, and it's gone. It's off of YouTube. They threatened to take the whole channel down because it was so dangerous. You tell me, you look and you listen at that interview with Heidi St. John, and you tell me what was dangerous. And if you can't, well, then doesn't that kind of imply that I'm on the right track here? And if not, how not? Lance Wallnau was taken down too. His video on YouTube. It's still up on Apple Podcasts. Take a listen. YouTube said the same thing. It's dangerous. This is dangerous. Guess they were channeling their religious spirit here. But you listen to that and you tell me what's dangerous about it. It was one of the most innocuous interviews of Lance Wallnau I've ever seen. But it was dangerous. I think it's abusive. I think it's bullying of political opponents. And I think they do it as much as they can without getting caught. And they just expect a very low attention span on people on the left, which is true. They have an extremely low, in my experience, an extremely low attention span. Over 8,000 people ultimately affixed their names to the statement, including countless ministry leaders. Those who did not subscribe were accused of violating sacred commandments. Rick Warren, megachurch founder and author of The Purpose-Driven Life. It says 2022, but that's not when The Purpose-Driven Life came out. And I'm going to say Charles Kessler, you missed that. Charles Kessler was a guest on the Republican Professor podcast. Mr. Editor-in-Chief, you missed that. Purpose-Driven Life did not come out in 2022. So proclaimed that wearing a mask, maybe he meant, maybe it was supposed to say he said this in 2022, but the 2022 comes right after Purpose-Driven Life, which makes it look like that's the printing of the book. proclaimed that wearing a mask is the great commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. One of the responsibilities of faith leaders is to tell people to trust the science. Warren solemnly intoned, they're not going to put out a vaccine that's going to hurt people. At this point, let me make a couple comments. One about the mask issue. The CDC mask rule of the Biden administration was illegal from the very beginning. As the producer of the podcast, it's my job to let you know that we have episodes on the mask mandate. It was illegal from the very beginning. We don't have the mask mandate anymore because it was illegal the whole time. Now, when you hitch your spiritual wagon to something that's illegal like that, it's just bizarre. It's a bizarre use of scripture. And it wasn't illegal in an illegitimate way like a lot of gun control is. It was struck down by a federal court, and I read the decision on the podcast. I'm like, we did a deep dive into this sucker, and it was not based on science. There was no justification for it at all in the rule, either in the announcement or the publication of it. It was arbitrary and capricious, and it was illegal. It violated federal law. What about that? Are any of these people mentioning anything about that? We're covering it on the podcast. And it took a Trump appointed federal judge to strike it down. She was appointed by Republican Senate. Thank God. Thank God. And by the way, there is no mask mandate anymore because everybody agreed, everybody sees she's correct on what she said. And that's what we've gone 2 episodes already on that. As far as the vaccine goes, I would say if you're not following the 2 doctors that are doing Informed Dissent podcast, Dr. Mark McDonald, MD, board certified in California, and Dr. Jeff Barkey, board certified in California, you need to get on that. Go to the very beginning of their podcast, Informed Dissent, and start there and listen to those. They take this apart, especially the language issue regarding the definition of vaccine, what a proper definition is, and the difference between a therapeutic on the one hand and a true vaccine on the other hand. And you might be very interested to see a redefinition in the works on certain therapeutics that are mislabeled. But in any case, another big theme of theirs is the issue of informed consent for bioethics, a necessary condition of legitimately bioethical medical intervention is informed consent. Now, how do you have conformed consent when there's no insert, there's no package insert? And I just go to RX for Liberty, check it out. You should also check out the episode that we did on the Republican Professor podcast interviewing Dr. Jeff Barkey. On that issue of trust the science, the quotation from Warren, what about censorship, Rick? What about that? Is it possible to have genuine inquiry of the type that's required to be knowledge when there's censorship of one side? What if it was your side being censored? Are we being hypocritical here? Huh? If it was the other side being censored, from my perspective, I would have a problem with that. And you can bet your bottom britches I would be calling it out because it's not healthy. I don't want it, and you shouldn't want it either. You should be ashamed of yourself if you have not called out radical censorship that only benefits your side. There, I said it. Basham's chapter on this COVID campaign is the best in her book. This is Paul Kengor again, page 83. CRB, summer 2024. But she also gives damning scrutiny to the critical race prophets among modern evangelicals and to those who have indulged the LGBTQ lobby. By the way, it's LGBTQR now, so Republicans are included now. So since I get benefit, I get money now. Basham concludes that chapter entitled None Dare Call It Sin with a choice quote from Presbyterian Church in America pastor Todd Pruitt. Pruitt sums up how once faithful Christian institutions succumbed to LGBTQ. Don't you like how I said it really fast? Like that's how they say it. Heresies. This does not happen overnight. It happens day by day over a period of years, one compromise at a time. It has indeed been a long march through these once faithful institutions. Is there any hope for them? In my mind, not really. Let me make another comment here related to the podcast. First of all, we've done a lot of work here on the podcast on the definition of marriage last year. And I remember a couple people asking me, how come you're covering that? Isn't that over and done with? And I was like, dude, it's important, whether it's over and done with, it's important to study because it actually happened. And you learn some logic while you're going through this on how to define terms and how to find if there's a little bit about how to find fallacies. But my state senator, Josh Newman, has sent a mailer, and you have to understand he's a new kind of Democrat. He's a new kind of Democrat, according to this mailer. And here he is talking to police officers. And I guess that's what he means by new kind of Democrat. I think back when the Democratic Party had the Klan in the South, they loved police officers. So I'm not sure what he's talking about as far as new. It looks the same to me. I'm not afraid to stand up to MAGA Republicans or leaders from my own party to do what's right for Orange County. And then there's all these issues, neighborhood safety, you got grocery store and government reform, job creation. And Josh Newman is a different kind of Democrat. So he's different kind of Democrat in that he's for neighborhood safety. He's against rising costs. He's for public education. He's against homelessness. He's for job creation and for government reform. What's different about that? I don't know. I mean, but anyway, what I want to show you is on the very back of this, there's a Proposition 3 on the California ballot here in 2024. Prop 3 ensures marriage equality. Prop 3 ensures marriage equality. Pardon me, excuse me. We're defining marriage again here. We're redefining it. What happened? Well, that's why I cover it on the podcast, because it ain't going away, people. It's very important to know how to define terms. And Prop 8 in 2008 in California defined marriage the same way the Oxford English Dictionary had defined marriage, and that had been in our spoken language for hundreds of years, and in other languages for even longer, like Greek and Latin and Hebrew and Chinese. When proponents of so-called marriage, which they didn't define, equality, which they also didn't define, sued Prop 8 to have it overturned in federal court, which was an illegitimate decision. It was based on logical fallacies. See the definition, see those episodes I did in 2023 in the summer for more information. When that happened, all it did was say that Prop 8 is not the definition of marriage in California. You got Prop 22 passed defining marriage. NRA marriage cases overturned that. It was a state Supreme Court, and it was 4-3, and the four people were wrong, as happens all the time. Majorities are wrong. Shocker. Prop 8 came to correct that mistake, and it did. And then it was sued by the same people who thought NRA marriage cases was correctly decided. And in Perry versus Schwarzenegger in 2010, Vaughn Walker, a district court judge in San Francisco, overturned Prop 8, and it went through the appeals process. The Ninth Circuit affirmed, shocker. And of course, it went up eventually in a different case in Obergefell in 2015, razor thin majority, 5-4. And the Republican Kennedy gets some things right, gets some things wrong. He got this one wrong. It was fallacious. It was sloppy. But what that did was it overturned definitions, and it just said, is the definition of marriage this? No, it's not. Well, then what is it? And the Supreme Court didn't say. So the Supreme Court and the federal court in Perry versus Schwarzenegger said this is not marriage, but it didn't say what it was, what marriage was. You still have to define the term. And when you define the term, it's going to exclude non-marriages. That's what a good definition does. Well, even a bad definition will logically exclude some things. Maybe it doesn't exclude the non-marriages. And I think that's what this Prop 3 thing is supposed to provide, a definition that includes non-marriages in the definition of marriage. So people are still confused about it. The second thing I want to mention is about abortion. We've covered this on the podcast. See the episode we did with the wonderful Scott Klusendorf, with Chris Kaiser, my former colleague at Loyola Marymount University, with Shannon Holzer. We've talked about it with him. It is ironic that love your neighbor as yourself would be used to market abortions, because in the New Testament, the parable of the Good Samaritan, where the love your neighbor as yourself thing is situated, involves a Samaritan who helps his cultural opponent when that opponent has been unjustly treated, has been harmed, has been hurt. And that the Samaritan can help that person. The neighbor is defined as that person who needs your help, who's right in front of you, and who you might view as an opponent to your way of life. Well, to me, that sounds like a fetus would qualify, your own child. If you're defining your own child as an opponent to your way of life, what you see as your future, whether it's completing college or whatever, if you see that child, your own child, as your opponent for what you want to do in life, and that child is right in front of you and needs your help, needs you, well, you can't use the parable of the Good Samaritan to justify killing that child. That makes no sense. You have to have an attention span, though, to get what I just said. I'm going back to Paul Kengor here. It has indeed been a long march through these once faithful institutions. Is there any hope for them? In my mind, not really. I'm firmly committed to a hell and a handbasket assessment of these churches and the culture. One might think that Megan Basham would be as well, but not necessarily. Though her report is discouraging, she concludes on a note of hope. Hope, after all, is a Christian virtue, no less needful than charity or faith. It's easy to lose hope when these men and women of Protestant pulpits have gone so foolishly and cravenly woke. But it was G.K. Chesterton who said that hope means hoping when things are hopeless, or it's no virtue at all. Basham's book ends in this spirit with an inspiring story of redemption, her own. Now, pay attention to this. This is good. Reading Basham in recent years, one might get the impression of a sharp young evangelical woman who has always had things together. But in the final chapter of Shepherds for Sale, she reveals that she has arrived at this point in her journey after a long and dreadful series of traumas: alcohol and drug abuse, sexual assault, car crashes, emergency room visits. She takes readers with her onto the floor of a jail cell where she found herself sleeping one summer morning, vaguely remembering a fight with her roommate from the night before. She left the party that night after washing down 2 Vicodin, 2 Xanax, 2 Somas with several vodka tonics. Jeez. All to take the edge off of amphetamine come down. She's grateful she ended up in a jail cell and not a morgue. Basham takes her recovery as evidence of God's great mercy for her. Amen. So there's hope. Don't give up. There's hope. She was her Christian's prodigal daughter, and these were her wasteland years. Yet she found that our God is still a God who brings dead girls to life. Even so, the sinner has to choose to walk out of the tomb. What brought Basham out was Jesus' supernatural instruction to go and sin no more, to just stop it. Enough. It did her no good to have enablers accommodate and affirm her in her sin. That is what so many shepherds are doing when they sell out their flocks. In turn, Basham now exhorts Christians to stay away from those preachers and stop rewarding them by remaining in their churches or buying their books. Those ministers who contort their message in a bid for worldly approval, belittling their sheep and defaming the church for the applause of the important and influential, do their followers no favors. Centuries ago, John Milton wrote of parishioners in corrupt churches that hungry sheep look up and are not fed. Megan Basham's heart is with the hungry sheep. Paul Kengor is professor of political science at Grove City College, director of the college's Institute for Faith and Freedom, best-selling author of over 20 books, and editor of the American Spectator. This is Claremont Review of Books, summer 2024, pages 82 to 83. Fleecing the Flock, Shepherds for Sale. It's a book review of Shepherds for Sale. Evangelical Leaders Traded the Truth for a Leftist Agenda by Megan Basham, Broadside Books. I would highly recommend the Claremont Review of Books. It's got really good writing, fantastic note by Charles Kessler, who was a guest on this podcast, one of my professors at the Claremont colleges. Kessler always has very insightful editor's note that he begins the whole thing with. And he's also got a great sense of humor, very dry sense of humor. The writing is fantastic. Some of the best writing in politics you'll see from people alive. One of my favorite writers is William Vogley, and he usually has a piece in there, and he's written some books as well. The Pity Party is a fantastic read. So this is me signing off. We're recording this from Orange County, California on the 26th of September, 2024, years after Jesus was born. And it's Thursday. Happy Thursday to you.